here's a question I think I've been avoiding. You probably can understand why. Nothing to do with whether or not I should be in the role of teacher or not with relation to people, or whether everybody needs them. But let me just read Richard's. This is Richard II. This is UK Richard, Richard the Lionhearted, and all that stuff. The idea around the importance of studying the visual impression. And this is an excerpt from something he sent me before. Okay, so the idea of around the importance of studying the visual impression has never been presented to me before, and the laying out of what makes up all painted imagery is very useful for me to refer to and use as a base. In relation to art fundamentals question, and this drawing question I asked, I wonder if you have any advice further for someone who is trying to self-teach themselves art. Could you please offer your advice further on best practices and/or best ways to practice and structure study? And finally, what's the best way to study the visual impression in art practice? So, yeah, Richard, and a great many people probably listening to my voice right now are asking similar questions. You're isolated for various reasons, and sometimes you just live far away from any place where you could study with somebody. And but just in general, everybody knows. Possibly, you may have heard the expression that self-taught person had a fool for a teacher, and so it's really an iffy proposition teaching yourself. In any case, and yet on the other hand, as Benson said, everybody has to teach themselves. But yeah, that's a very easy thing for Benson to say, who had teachers around him showing him stuff, right? So, and there's a lot of stuff to be seen. There's a lot of misleading stuff, and there's a lot of stuff that's of very poor value. And it could cost you years if you're in the world of self-teaching. One of the things I like to say about teaching itself is that one of the reasons you're with somebody in a room is to save years and years of experience. You probably can get where I am or where other people are, but it's going to take you a very long time. So you speak to somebody who's been over the mountains and through the woods and down the valleys and found the bridges and all those things, and they know some things, if by nothing else, by experience. And you do have a reason in terms of shortness of life. I mean, Campbell's favorite line was, and he repeated it to us often, life is short, art is long. So what is that? Ars longa vita brevis, the other way around. Anyway, but so understanding that, you really want to find other ways. And yet, I mean, you have books out there you can look at. These days you have videos you can watch. You get some sort of an idea. You may be able to even hang out with guys that are working from a model or something or other, just once a week or something. It's not an uncommon thing to be able to find. And just by doing that, you find yourself in a world, in sort of that larger world. I mentioned that one because there are examples of semi-self-taught people. There's an American, what was his name? I'm not trying to show pictures of these guys, but John Lafarge was largely self-taught. And everybody in New York would like to say they were self-taught. And most of them had studied with somebody in the Art Students League. The Art Students League, by the way, in New York had a way of making you self-taught. I mean, there's so little information to be had. And I say that just comparatively. Compared with when you get to Gamble, there's just so much information and so much of an intellectual conversation going on that you were feasting and had deep saturation of important information constantly coming at you. But yeah, so the self-taughts, who was the other one? There's a name you would know, I think. Well, you might not know, but again, he's in the American Arts book. And almost comes to me at the same time as John Lafarge. Gamble used to refer to him as the best of the self-taught, the greatest of the self-taught painters. And this one really did appear to come from that sort of world. And a lot of the stuff he did was problematical from the point of view of anybody who had any shall we say, range, cosmopolitan experience in the world of painting. I mean, one of the problems you have being locked in on your own is that you'll be drinking your own beliefs, your own poisons. I mean, you really have to have a very strong sense of humility. You also have to know a couple things. For example, you need to know that nature is the master, and your mastery of nature has to be handled with great humility. You really have to. You really have to doubt everything you see. All the marks you make, you have to doubt them and find ways to proving that you're not wrong or that you are wrong or whatever. And because I mean, in fact, you can't teach yourself anything without a brush in your hand. Everybody knows that, right? You can't. You have to make marks. The marks is evidence that you grasp something, right? Da Vinci, many people will talk exactly that same way. And I've always found it. I mean, there was no level of knowledge I could get without a brush in my hand. I just knew there was no useful information unless you were gaining it with a brush in your hand or a pencil or charcoal, whatever. So, um, yeah, there's so many little sort of sidewinding points like that, but still, that doesn't mean you're actually helpless. I mean, the world is full of pictures, and you say art, and I worry about the use of the word art. I mean, art is probably the bane of great painting. It's this idea of art and artsiness and all that stuff, and we're all trying to make our mark in the world of art. And actually, what you're trying to do is be a great student of nature for at least the first 10 years of your self-teaching. And I really think that's all there is. I honestly don't buy the idea that we're all trying to find our quote style as Degas refers to it. So what we are trying to do is, by the way, initially is everyone, in my view, everyone ought to be teaching themselves to be an impressionist. In other words, to paint nature as they see it in front of them. And they need to do it via the ensemble, not by one object at a time and understanding an object, and not by anatomy. But yes, one of the things I liked particularly about Gamel's world is that when I first arrived, he says, we make pictures. And everything you would do to self-teach wants to be based on the idea of a picture. Draw what you see in front of you, all of it, within that square. Now, it doesn't mean you can't study portions, but understand that they are portions. It's not the seen world, right? And the seen world is really the thing you must master. And I mean the seen world taken in a rectangle. Look through a viewfinder, that world. And so you've heard me say these sorts of things over and over again. Oh, when am I going to get to the point? Could you offer advice further on best practices or ways to practice and structure study? Actually, let me say something else before I do that again. I meant to mention Degas. Degas is known to have one clear year of study with somebody. It's doubtful. There's so much doubt on anything else he did, except for one rather very significant thing, and that is that he hung out with guys who were in the schools, who had been in the schools, and they painted together, they drew together. He studied with Louis Lamotte, who that was at the École des Beaux-Arts, who had been a student of Ingres. So it was a terrific start. And Ingres personally gave him some advice. Talking about drawing lines, by the way, the idea of learning to draw shape, to see shape. And lines isn't a problem. Lines is a factor in nature. It's just not that lines is the visual world. Lines is just a factor, right? Shape is a factor and a most significant factor, right? So drawing lots of lines, my son, from memory and from nature, that was the Angian advice, at least in one of the quotes. But he spent a lot of time learning how to do memory drawing from some of the memory drawing students of Lecoq. I don't see any evidence that he studied with Louis Lecoq. I'd have to look that up. Gamel has that information in his book. I'm quite sure that's the case. He also is reputed, and I'm pretty sure it's true, that he did some work with Alfred Stevens in regard to painting, But that really is easily his great sort of deficiency. And I say the word deficiency because what's going to happen if you're self-taught is you're going to have deficiencies you don't know anything about. When you hang out with a person who is knowledgeable, you should find, first of all, somebody who's knowledgeable in all areas, who is good at the craft, who's good at the painting part, who's good at drawing, who's good at knowing the difference between the seen world and the object world, all that sort of stuff, and who knows how to play the relational game to the nth degree. But so it seems to me, and I Gamble said a number of times that he really had a wonderful painting skill, but I don't see it in many of his pictures. I see, or at least I don't see a concerted painting skill combined with great drawing skill. I mean, his early, very early stuff, where he's doing outline drawings and putting them up there and then coloring them in, it looks like he has a painting skill of the academic sort. But there's so much work where he's just doing funny stuff, pictures falling apart in very funny ways. Some of which, of course, have been overcleaned and things like that. But the big worry you have as a self-taught person is that you'll have deficiencies that you know nothing about. So at the very least, you'd want somebody around to glance at what you're doing from time to time to make sure you're not doing something completely insane. Again, the reason you work with somebody, secondly, is that you want a fresh eye on your work. You want somebody to look at the stuff you're doing and say, don't you see something really obvious? Don't you see this proportion is off and that sort of thing. And barring that, what you have to use is devices, right? So if you're going to work for yourself, use relational devices, right? So if you're trying to get the proportions of points, like a point here to here to here, you can use a viewfinder box, but don't just put this out here and transfer it over to here, because that's not seeing. So, and everything you need to do, you can copy masters, you can do whatever, but copy relationally, copy visually. Don't copy by tracing things. Don't copy in any other way that doesn't incorporate all the time the world of the relationships. Paint from the relational all the time. Every time you make a single mark, paint it from the relationships. And so if you're drawing a line and it scoops like this and goes at a certain angle, be sure you're aware of how that angle feels to vertical. Get those concepts in your mind. So someone showed one of these ads. They're showing a V-shaped device, where you can actually set an angle up and transfer an angle. Well, an angle actually is a valid thing that could be transferable, providing you don't move so if you have a wedge, or what do we call it, a V thing, a device, what is it? What do you call that device? I own one of these things, Frank. It doesn't belong to Mr. Gamble. But if you have a device that will make an angle for you, and you put it over here, but you turn it slightly, the whole angle will go differently. But with all you're getting, though, get the angle relationship to vertical. But the other thing about measuring is, no matter what you do, you've got to measure with your eyes first, or you won't be training your eyes. So any device you use, don't do it first. Never, ever, ever, ever measure first. But if you're going to have to use devices, which if you're working all by yourself, you probably will have to use, just try to figure out how to rely on them. And the most important one is just don't use them first. Don't say, what angle is that, and immediately think this. Just don't do that, okay? When you say, what angle is that, immediately observe vertical and see how it feels to vertical with your eyes. Get concepts, okay? And then try to reproduce that concept on the paper. So, but other than that, I mean, you definitely should do a cast. But the way we did casts, we did them as a total picture. We never did anything that I can recall at Gamma was a study of some little piece of something. Now, that doesn't mean you couldn't study form by separating a piece out, right, and then just study the form. So you have a nose, one of those Michelangelo noses or something. There's no reason why you can't do that. But that isn't the primary methodology. The primary methodology for relational seeing, the one that really obviously requires relational seeing, is to take the cast and learn to place the cast well so that it's in equilibrium, so its total effect is in equilibrium within the frame. The equilibrium just means that it balances across the center, as it were. And that doesn't mean even across the center. It means the feeling of distribution. Well, things like that, it's barely possible to teach yourself stuff like that. To hear an idea like that and mess with it, you might over time come up with something, but that's where somebody could in a minute or two or a couple critiques actually correct you. So yeah, there's a number of things like that you will probably never hear of by reading for yourself. Lots of books, by the way, are out there on how to, and I'm talking about Speed and Solomon and stuff like that. But the better part of anybody's education really is an eye that's better than them, right nearby. But anyway, cast drawing is one of those things. Drawing from still lifes. I'm not even going to recommend you do color. I would suggest you just stick for now with drawing, but drawing still lifes. Drawing anything. Drawing from the masters. It's really not great to get reproductions of the masters. It's better to go to a museum, but the reproductions are really faulty in so many ways. But if you're trying to see spatial relations, you can do that. But just no matter what you do, if you're copying something, copy the thing relationally. And you know what I mean by that, I think now. But look at my other stuff if you want. Um, yeah. uh, memory training is one of those things that you can do by yourself. The Madame Covey, the little tiny book by Madame Covey on memory training is a perfectly good one to read. And you should be able to find that over there. I bet she was living in England when she wrote it. And use that. Just start with that and just do it the way she says to do it. But you're going to have to do it relentlessly. You're going to have to figure out some way. Don't overdo it. I mean, things like that, little things like that. Who's going to tell you that? I mean, you can spend 3 hours on a thing and just make yourself sick of it, the whole idea of memory drawing. Or you can do sporadic bites, and get a little success or whatever, and get a new start at it. And get a new start. It takes a tremendous amount of energy and focus. But yeah, so um, yeah, probably. I mean, that's the standard stuff of the education of the artist. It's copying masters, not with the idea of making yourself like them. Copying drawings, for example, by which I've done of Raphael to just get the line quality. And uh, when you're trying to draw line drawings, that line quality is one of the aesthetic things that happens in pictures. And you could say it's stylized, but in reality, it's there for expression. That is a line moving from a sharper edge line to a softer one, to a darker one, or to a finer one, to a whatever. The things, the shifts when you're drawing around a shape are all full of information about the world in front of you. So none of that stuff is random. It's not artsy. Those guys, in my view, virtually none of them did that. A few people did, the artsy ones, but that's the mannerist, and you don't want to look at mannerists. So yeah, so do what everybody else does. I mean, really draw casts, but you got to learn from somebody how to set up a cast. So you have a single light source, so you have a good silhouette on both sides of the cast. Now, just one little piece of advice after the other. Why to stand in one place and not be moving all around the floor. Make sure you only look at the model from exactly one place every time you look at it. So you're not drawing 13 different images by chance, thinking that somehow you just get back and start drawing, and there's that thing that's fixed. That thing isn't fixed. Your eye has to be fixed. But things like that, who's going to tell you that? How far back to stand in relation to your models? And you need that information. And by the way, and why, I'm going to tell you now, stand back. Da Vinci said stand back at least 3 times from whatever you're drawing so you don't get perspective distortion. But in fact, standing back even more than that helps you with seeing the thing as a whole much better. So if you're drawing a thing this big, I actually tell students to stretch out their arms. That width there for most people is about as close as you can be. So if you have a drawing and it's that wide, you can put it right here. If it's bigger than that, it has to be back here, because otherwise you won't be able to take in all of it at once, right? That's typical of most people. It's very funny that that's true. So you carry it around with you like the footman, the foot of the cubit. I don't know if that's helpful to you. Do draw lots of lines. Follow that advice of Ang. It's about shape making and getting good proportions and learn how to get proportions. I like that Ang didn't let people into a studio if they couldn't get angles and proportions. I mean, proportions are a classic relational problem, right? Proportions, here's my hand sitting here. This thing is up here. This is down here. And how far is this in relation to that? That's proportional. That's a relational world that I want you in. Don't do anything that isn't about a relationship, and you won't go sideways. Okay? If you're talking about values, it's for sure the same thing. How dark is something if I have you to block in a still life, you want to know what your darkest dark is and your lightest light. And there's this ramifications of all those things being collated well. Practice that. Don't practice anything else. Don't draw the object. Draw the value relationships. And you cannot go wrong. No matter what you do that with everything. But the only other thing I could tell you, though, is to have somebody come around, even somebody who doesn't know anything about painting, and just have them look at what you're doing, not to give you advice, but just to give you a fresh eye and tell them to be totally honest, so they can just say, oh, you must have been looking for when you looked at that, when you made that drawing, you must have been looking through a torqued mirror, or something. Somebody who will be that honest with you, Preferably not some amateur that you know, somebody you know who and like who doesn't even, they're a lawyer or something. That'd be your best bet. Not that I think lawyers are all that straight, but anyway. Oh well, I'm impugning a whole race of people. Oh well, I better stop that. All right. I know some really great lawyers, so people who actually love justice more than they love money. So, and I suspect that most lawyers are like that. Um, could you best practice structuring study? Structuring study, yeah, it does matter. I mean, I like that Somerset Maugham thing when somebody said, do you paint when you're inspired? Do you write when you're inspired, or how do you do this?" And he says, "Yeah, I write when I'm inspired, and my inspiration starts at 9 o'clock every morning. So you got to set aside time to do this, and you need to do something in the range of 4 hours a day of work. Anybody who's teaching you music will tell you that there's something in that range, something like no fewer than 20 hours a week, and the more the better, the more the faster you move along. That's just the way it is, and it's not different in our field. So that's in the idea of structured and practice. But practice. Don't mistake the word practice. You have a little problem with form. Go ahead and study. Go draw out of your head. Do a ball out of your head with a light source from such and such a place, and try to figure out form. Sort of try to make it look like that, just out of the projection of the mind. But that doesn't. It's necessarily, but it's going to help you with this particular orange. But but nevertheless, find practices, things that'll give you a little lift. But don't just sit on those things. Think at first we do this, now we do this, and all these little pieces. They'll somehow make you a picture maker. They won't. Picture making will make you a picture maker. Do the picture making, and if you find some odd anomaly, and I say it's the same thing as playing sports, just play the whole game. And every once in a while, you'll see, for example, you keep dribbling the ball off your foot. Well, just leave the court, or whenever the game's over, go back and practice dribbling the ball, running up the floor, up and down the floor, chewing gum, cussing at somebody, and not dribbling the ball off your foot, okay? And if you all know what I mean by dribbling the ball, it's also true in, I guess, in soccer. So, so you can do things to actually improve on particular practices. But yeah, it's so easy to get into bad practices. The one thing I can say, just stick with the idea of the relational. And it's very hard. You'll start be traveling down the right path. And lots of stuff will start making sense to you. But more than anything else, you'll begin to see the world of art, which is the world of relationships. You'll just begin to hear the music if you just stay tuned to the relationship of this to that and how they play to each other. You got an angle here. How does it feel to this one and that one and this one? How does that set of angles feel to each other? And I say feel, right? It's a big deal to say it that way. And then if you have devices that you can check with a little bit on some of these angle relationships, or proportional relationships, go ahead and do it. Uh, I think I'll stop at that. That's all. This has been long-winded. I didn't mean to be. Richard, give it a good shot, but also give Ollie a cry over there. I give him your information, and he could at least just line you up with the floor, so you're not just doing goofy stuff for long periods of time. Okay, if he is willing and able, he's very busy and he's often out of the area, so I can't make any promises. And I apologize to you, Ollie, for putting you on the spot like this. Um, so, all right. That's it. Thank you very much for your attention. And I'd like to apologize for not showing you more visuals, but there it is. It's a chat. And I wish you well in your endeavors. All you guys who are really struggling to be, quote, self-educated, don't lose heart in the effort. And in truth, God's world is it. Whatever you see in front of you, it's all there. All the secrets are there. So have some faith, and even in your own mind. But stay humble. Don't be out there trying to make art. Just be out there before nature and just trying to be an honest servant of the arts, a servant of truth, right? And you'll get to good places. And who knows what after that, if there is a what. Okay. All right. See you next time.